Hello, everyone. Today I will be talking to Tiwa, who studied with me here in this faculty, in fact, in this office some years ago. Now, Tiwa, let me begin by asking you a question about the very word divinity. When people hear the word divinity or the
Mm.
phrase faculty of divinity, they may feel a bit puzzled, perplexed, intrigued, confused, because we don't use that word divinity in everyday English. So, what do you
Mm.
think it means? Can you help us to make sense of that word divinity?
So for me, I've always seen divinity as kind of the study of people's idea of what is out there in the world. And it doesn't really mean to me the traditional idea of God. It doesn't mean one God, but it's how people relate to the concept of a God or the concept of the universe being God. So I think it's pretty broad. And I think that's what people miss. Sometimes they kind of assume that it's just Christianity or it's just a monotheistic view of divinity, but it's really broad and it can encompass almost anything.
Many different conceptions of divinity that have been articulated through human history. Okay. Now,
Mm.
let me ask you a question about the concrete impact factor, so to speak, of studying religion.
Mm.
I can see you are doing a lot of wonderful, great work in tackling racism in schools. Now, you studied many papers across 3 years here in the Faculty of Divinity. What is the connection between whatever you studied here in the faculty and this good work you're doing?
Well, I studied a really large amount of topics, I think, whilst I was there. And the thing that really stuck out to me, the thing that I knew that I wanted to focus on before I even got to Cambridge was probably the study of African Christianity. I have a very personal connection to it. My dad's side of the family is from Nigeria, and they've been largely involved in the church there. So that's something I focused on a lot. And I remember in first year, I don't think this paper even exists anymore, but it was like a sociology religion paper. I've forgotten what it's called. But we did all sorts of observations, looking at ethnographies that were in Nigeria, about Pentecostal churches there. And that kind of started off my interest in it. And then going through my degree all the way till third year, I did Christianity in Africa and the Middle East in third year. And then I also did a coursework paper which looked at the idea of African Christianity as a separate factor, not a separate religion, but something that's very easily defined. And kind of through that study and also through my own personal experience, I realized that there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of inequality facing particularly African diaspora churches in the UK, which is what I focused on. And that kind of brought to my attention other inequalities within the world, and especially within education. Whilst I was at Cambridge, outside of my studies, I was BME officer in my college, and some of the experiences I had there really emboldened me to speak up. And coupled with the experiences I had whilst I was still at school as well, it kind of came to a point in 2020 when the world was really starting to take stock of what had happened with the Black Lives Matter protests. But I thought it was important to say something. But I will say that my time at Cambridge and my time kind of pushing my own opinions and learning to question myself really gave me the foundations that I needed to do that.
All right, wonderful. Now, on that note, religions are often viewed as these structures or superstructures that only defend and sustain and maintain the status quo. Do you think religions have the power to challenge, interrogate, subvert, or even undermine socioeconomic hierarchies or socio-political, racial,
Mm.
socio-ritual, all kinds of hierarchies, whatever they may be?
I think they absolutely do, but I would say that they're not often used to do that. In fact, I think it's most often the case that they're used to do the opposite, to kind of reinforce those hierarchies. But I don't think that's symptomatic of a problem with those religions in the first place. I think it's people in power that benefit from privilege find it easy to use religions to kind of prop that up. And I think that's what ends up happening. However, I do think that they have great potential to be used as great levelers. I studied the writings of Paul in third year, the letters of Paul, and I remember famous scripture in Galatians that says we're all equal. You know, there's neither slave nor free, we're all one. And I think it's a shame that that isn't often what takes place, and that's not often the reality in churches. I remember during 2020, I was doing some work with the pastor of this huge diaspora church in London called Jesus House. And he sits on this kind of council of leaders in Christianity. So there's someone from the Orthodox Church, there's someone from the Church of England, and then the diaspora churches as well. And we sat on a meeting with the then Archbishop of Canterbury discussing racism in the church and how prevalent it is. And a lot of people were sharing their experiences of things that you would never expect to happen in a religious setting in a church, and some really terrifying examples of racism. So I do think it has the potential to promote equality and to promote liberation. I did work in Cambridge on liberation theology, on Black theology. But because the church is, or religion is, a facet of society and it's kind of married to the way that we operate already, I think it's more often used as a tool of oppression.
That's a very nice way of putting it. So religious visions like Christianity and others, they have this message of radical hope. And yet that message is what makes many people very uneasy and anxious.
I think so. I think it does. And I think it makes people that are already benefiting from the status quo anxious. And quite often it's tied to wealth. It can be tied to other forms of privilege, such as the privilege of being born a male, for example. And I think that's where you see perhaps the leadership of these organizations trying to gatekeep those positions of power, trying to stop women from entering the ministry, for example, or trying to make it as difficult as possible for people from other backgrounds to enter into the ministry. And I think that's all done because they realize the status and the power that they have at the head of these organizations. But I do think it's changing quite a lot, just from the younger generation moving into those leadership positions. I think, we're a bit more willing to change things, and certainly very accustomed to putting pressure to those in power, and to speaking up and using tools such as social media to do that. So I have a lot of optimism for where it's going. But yeah, I think historically you only have to look at history to see how religion has been used to oppress people.
Oh, I agree. I mean, that's why I use the phrase radical hope. It's this hope that somehow change can be possible if it starts right now.
And I think the reason for that radical hope is that, I guess from the Christian perspective, because I had the most experience perhaps doing biblical papers from first year to third year, the reason there is that radical hope is that it's evident in the text, and it really comes through. And, people try and ascribe different meanings to that, but if you were to read it for what it is, in my opinion, you would have that hope and you would have that optimism and also that drive to change things and a drive to help the oppressed. And I think, you'd struggle to read the Bible at least and not come to that conclusion.
The narrative of liberation and redemption you find in books like the Book of Exodus has become the template for many social historical movements in North America and elsewhere.
Definitely. And I think it will continue to do so. I will say one thing, that religion has got really bad PR at the moment, in terms of social media and in terms of young people, is being seen as archaic and oppressive. And, if you're a young person looking at that or looking into studying theology at the moment, you might say, like, that's so old-fashioned. Why would I want to study these texts written thousands of years ago? I think as theologians, or I don't know if I describe myself as that anymore, but as people that are passionate about the study of divinity, we have a real job to do in advertising what it is that we do, and really emphasizing the link to modernity and the link to society and that aspect of what we do and why it's really super important. Because I think not everyone knows that.
Yes. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that if we critically, creatively read these religious texts, sometimes against the grain, we can begin to find a liberative potential that is
Mm,
somewhere buried there, and you can excavate it.
absolutely. And do you know what? I don't even think it's always buried. I think it's people willfully not understanding it or not taking it out and picking and choosing tags. Because I think it's probably there on the surface for the most part in the text that I've read. And that's why I have such optimism. And I think that's what we need to hang on to. But like I said, we've got a job to do in terms of changing the image that people have. And that image is accurate sometimes because of the actions taken by institutions and by leaders themselves and the words they've said. You wouldn't blame people for thinking that it's perhaps archaic.
And that brings me to the final question for today. The time you spent 3 years in this faculty studying religion, how has it changed or recalibrated your understanding of what it means to be human?
Wow, it's a really big question. Um, in so many ways, it exposed me to religions that I had probably no prior knowledge of during your paper in Hinduism and Buddhism. And that is a completely new worldview, or it was for me, um, and a completely different system of belief and a completely different meaning of what it is to be a person, how long you spend on earth as well, how many opportunities you have to be a person and to interact with others. So I think in that way, it completely changed my view. But it also changed my view because of the other people that I met while studying the degree. I think we're a really small cohort, but so diverse in terms of views and life experiences. And it changed for me my definition of my own faith, my own relationship with Christianity. Because, you know, I came in as a Christian, I believed all my life, I still do. But I met a lot of people who had a very different view of Christianity to me. And it really changed the way that I look at it as a religion, as an institution. And for me, it really kind of encouraged me to separate uh, the institution of the church and, you know, the political worries that come along with that from my own belief. And it really encouraged me to separate religion and faith. And I think now I'd probably look at it and say, I'm not religious, but I have faith in God. Whereas before, if you said to me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm really religious, I'm Christian, and I wouldn't have necessarily seen the difference between the two. And I think probably that's one of the biggest things that stuck with me. There's so many other ways that it's changed my outlook and changed who I am, but yeah, those two probably stick with me as being the biggest.
Wonderful. So you have been able to think critically about the meaning of faith, and in the process, also think critically about the meaning of being human.
Absolutely, definitely, and also you know, about other people and how I relate to them and their faiths as well. It's I think it's what it instilled in me was a deep respect for other people's belief systems and how they worship, and knowing that that is sacred. And of course, you might not understand all of it, but it's important to respect it. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of people in the world need to learn. And you know, if everyone could study theology, maybe that would be great. We'd avoid a lot of wars and a lot of strife.
Wonderful. Just hearing you, I'm feeling so inspired to go out and somehow change the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you did a great job inspiring me whilst I was there. So,
Okay, maybe that's how I'm doing. So, Tiwa, thank you very much for talking to me.
oh, thank you so much for having me.
Next time you're in Cambridge, do let me know, and we
I
will
will do.
revisit these conversations.
Absolutely, that would be great.